I'll admit that I was always skeptical about ghosts and the like. If someone told me about it, I'd have scoffed, rolled my eyes, or waved it off like a dog begging for scraps. That is until one night I had an experience that has never left me, and I don't think it will. It certainly changed my way of thinking, and I became more open-minded. One night I went to visit my mom, who was staying in a woman's house for a fortnight, to watch her cat because she was away on a holiday. My mom was severely depressed at the time and was feeling suicidal, so I would walk over every day to see her and leave when it was dark to walk back home. I seen her on the night she admitted she was feeling suicidal, and when I got home there was a strange feeling. I was alone, but it had a different feeling. My brothers weren't in as they spent the night at a friend's. I can remember it was around 12 a.m. and as I was leaving the bathroom after brushing my teeth, I walked along the hall landing and there was something at my room door. It wasn't a person or shaped like one. It had no features to it. More accurately, it was like a shadow figure. It was dark at night. The only light source was a light orange glow from my Himalayan salt lamp, so I couldn't have been my own shadow. I am 6'4". The shadow was smaller than myself. The shadow wasn't shaped like a human or any animal that I recognize. It was kind of floating on the spot, moving similar to that of a candle flame when a soft, gentle breeze blows, or if it's easier to imagine, the same way as when you see the heat rising from the streetway out to the far off distance. I felt paralyzing fear and a gut feeling that it was hostile. I remember walking backwards and shouted on my mom, and then shouted my brother's name. I was so full of fear that I forgot they weren't in. I remember stopping on the spot and felt that I couldn't move an inch. I was literally frozen stiff. I don't know how long had passed as it felt like an eternity, but the shadow never moved towards me or from the spot it was originally on. Then it just dropped like a cloud of smoke into the floor under my bed. I stood motionless for a few moments longer, and when I finally got into bed I turned on my TV and the volume way up high. I had consistent nightmares for weeks afterwards, and the thought of it would not leave me. So I spent this past weekend at the family friend cottage I go to every year. It's never really been any source of paranormal stuff, at least that I've heard from other people or seen myself. Maybe 10 years ago, the owner of the cottage, a darling elderly couple who were the parents of my dad's old work friend, sadly passed away. Their son and his wife now own majority, I believe, and their daughter and her husband hold a share if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, my family owns one of those pop-up trailers that you can hitch to the back of a car, so we bring that every year and park it on the lawn on the right side of the cottage just under some trees near the brush. We're a family of 5, so I stayed in the large twin bed on one end. My younger brother slept on the twin pull-out bed in the center. My parents stay in the double bed on the opposite side of the trailer, and my youngest brother wanted to sleep in a small tent just outside the trailer to be quirky. The second night we were there, I had a nightmare. I don't exactly remember the events of the dream, but I remember the last bit of it that woke me up was seeing the face of an elderly woman that was distorted and angry. The facial features were very similar to the woman who had previously owned the cottage. Sharp features on a slightly round face. Her name was Iris. Except I could tell whatever it wasn't her. Iris was the sweetest, most caring woman I had ever met, and I remember her kindness to this day, even if she passed away while I was a young teen, and I don't remember a whole lot of her and her husband Herb, since I only saw them once a year. Whatever it was I saw, I think made itself to look like Iris, but twisted the image to give her an almost evil appearance. The expression was angry, her mouth was open with sharp teeth, her skin was mangled, and her eyes were not her own. Needless to say, I woke up and couldn't get the image out of my head. It was as if her face was burned into the inside of my eyelids, like I could still see it when I closed my eyes, not just in my imagination, but eventually I was able to fall back asleep. Once I woke up around 8:15 a.m., it was because my family was awake and getting dressed. It being a little earlier than I like to get up while on vacation, I stayed in bed. I tried to go back to sleep and almost did until about 10 minutes later I heard someone come back in the trailer. I opened the curtains and my younger brother was back in bed. He's a bit of a crybaby, so I assumed he had an argument with my parents and went back in the trailer to sulk. At some point, maybe 5 to 10 minutes after getting back in bed, he gets up and starts walking around. I figure he's just changing clothes and leaving or something, so I wait until he leaves to really try and fall asleep again. But he doesn't. After about 10 minutes of just pacing through the small trailer, I get fed up and open the curtains to ask him what he's doing, except there's no one in the trailer. Up until I opened the curtain, the trailer was creaking and shaking as it normally does when one walks around it. I don't remember the trailer door opening or closing after my brother left, although I was half asleep so I must have missed it. But either way, something stayed behind and paced after my brother had left. Safe to say, I got up and went into the cottage immediately after realizing something was in the trailer with me. Then I remembered the nightmare I had. I remember thinking after I woke up that there was something in the trailer with me that was pretending to be Iris but wasn't, and it had shown itself in my dreams. I guess I didn't believe it enough, so it decided to show me another way. When I was about 8 years old, I woke up suddenly around 3:30 a.m. My closet was about 2 to 3 feet from my bed and was half open for some reason. I shut it completely every night before I go to bed. I turned on my bedside lamp and the light shone part of the inside of my closet. To my shock and horror, as I looked towards the top of the door, a brown eye was staring back at me. I knew it wasn't any of my brothers as we all have bright blue eyes. I shrieked and screamed for my dad, assuming someone broke into our home and somehow got past our 2 dogs. He runs in. I point to my closet. He opens it and nothing is there. He checks the entire house. Nothing is missing, out of place, and obviously no burglar. To this day, I can't explain what it was. Fast forward 7 years, I was 15 at the time, again woken up at 3:30 a.m. I laid in bed, tried going back to sleep, and no luck. About 20 minutes of tossing and turning, I heard the squeak of my closet being opened. I froze. My back was towards my closet, and I heard heavy footsteps walking towards my bed. The footsteps stopped right next to the head of my bed. My heart was pounding again, thinking someone broke in and got past the 2 dogs we still had. Instead of screaming, first I decided to quickly turn around and start swinging. After 2 failed attempts to connect with the person I assumed was there, I turned on my lamp and no one was there, but my closet was again half open. Since that night, until the day I moved out, my bedroom doorknob would rattle from 3 to 4 a.m., the living room TV would turn on randomly and the volume would be all the way up, doors opening and slamming shut. I was tormented for years, and I'm now terrified of basements and closets in the dark. I'm 25 and have to sleep with the light on. I guess I needed to vent this out because unexplainable things are happening again and almost no one believes me. I'm terrified to be alone. It was near Christmas in December of 1988 when my family received news that there had been a car accident in their village less than a mile away from my grandparents' house. At the time, nobody knew who had been involved yet. News quickly spread and my grandparents were called into the police station to identify a body. Unfortunately, it was that of my Uncle Dale. My whole family was shocked, and as you can be when grieving, in complete pieces with the loss of their brother and son. My dad, who was very close to him, was heartbroken, and so was my other uncle, my Uncle Gary. However, what happened that night will remain in my family folklore to this day. That night, my dad was sleeping, and at the time he was dreaming. He claims he had experienced out-of-body experiences when he was younger, which is important in this story. He always describes it as the dream broke away and he was placed into a situation where the dream had gone and he was woken up in a different reality. He found himself stood in a meadow where the grass was as green as grass could be, the sky was blue and clear, and the sun on his skin felt warm. In this moment, he said he felt truly at peace. In this meadow, there was a cottage. He started walking towards it when he heard no other than my Uncle Dale, who had passed away that same day. He turned around and sure enough, it was him. He said that my Uncle Dale took him to see the cottage and for a tour of the place that he was in. My dad claims that he could see other people there too, everyone happy and going about whatever business in their own meadows. Apparently every meadow was separate, similar to houses. My dad questioned my uncle about this place that they were in, and my uncle then began talking about the cottage they lived in. He said that the place was amazing and that he loved it there. Apparently, he told my dad that he lived in there with my great-granddad and a friend of his that died only a year before in the colliery that him and my dad worked at. My uncle said that they say hello. My uncle proceeded and told my dad the place he was living in was amazing and told my dad not to worry because he was now at peace and further asked my dad if he'd like to stay there with him. My dad declined and said that he needed to go, but he was sure that he'd be back soon. My dad then awoke, still in his own bed, and rushed downstairs to tell my family. Now this is where it gets weird and spooky. My dad rushed down the stairs into the dining room of my grandparents, auntie, and my Uncle Gary. My Uncle Gary was sat in the middle of them and my family gathered around him. He was inconsolable. My dad then asked my Nana if I could have a word with her and told her what happened. She apparently went white and told my dad to speak to my Uncle Gary as he wouldn't believe what had happened to him. My uncle's story is like this. Him and my aunt had recently moved into a bungalow the next town over. After the previous day and everyone coming to their senses of losing my Uncle Dale, him and my aunt went home and went to bed. That morning he woke up, he said the room and its atmosphere was almost charged with electricity and it was icy cold. He said he could feel a depression on the end of the bed on my aunt's side. My aunt was still asleep and he could feel her next to him. Thinking it was an intruder, he sprung up and turned around quickly to confront what it was. When he looked at the figure, he saw my Uncle Dale, sat at the end of the bed looking at my aunt while she was sleeping. He said my Uncle Dale then turned and looked at him dead in the eyes, looked back at my auntie, and then disappeared into thin air, almost implying that he needs my Uncle Gary to look after her now that he's no longer here. Now some of you may be thinking, well, that could just be a very heavy coincidence. However, the thing that still gives me goosebumps to this day is when my dad asked what clothes my Uncle Dale was wearing when my other uncle has his experience. My Uncle Gary replied he described right down to the last detail exactly what my Uncle Dale was wearing, and it was the exact same outfit that my dad had saw Uncle Dale wearing in his experience that happened that night. To this day, both my dad and Uncle Gary can't believe the experience they had and shared. For me, a generation down, it always gives me goosebumps and chills. At the same time, it makes me think that it was one last goodbye from someone who was gone too soon, and I love that.